Picture an 80-year-old girl, standing in the center of Rome's most exclusive auction house. Her small hands trembling as aristocrats examine her like she's a rare jewel. They're considering purchasing. The bidding starts at 100,000 denarii, already enough to buy an entire merchant fleet. But the price keeps climbing higher and higher until it reaches an amount that could purchase 10 fully loaded trading ships, making her worth more than some Roman cities' entire annual budgets. Her name was Marina, and she was about to become the most expensive child ever sold in the Roman Empire. But here's the part that will shatter your heart. After 3 years of being molded into the perfect entertainment for Rome, as elite after becoming more valuable than naval fleets, her owners fed her to wild lions in the Colosseum, simply because they grew bored with her. This is the story of how Roman society's obsession with exotic human possessions turned a little girl into a commodity worth armies, only to destroy her for sport when she was no longer amusing enough. Before we dive into this devastating tale that exposes the darkest corners of Roman entertainment culture, if you want to hear more shocking truths that history books refuse to tell, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's amazing how we can connect across centuries to remember these forgotten victims whose stories deserve to be told. What you're about to discover is just another account of Roman cruelty. This is about a systematic industry that transformed childhood innocence into the ultimate luxury product, where a little girl's suffering became entertainment, so valuable that emperors would bankrupt provinces just to witness it. Marina didn't just lose her freedom. She lost her childhood, her identity, and ultimately, her life, all to feed Rome's insatiable appetite for increasingly extreme spectacles. Our story begins in 142 AD, on the remote island of Britannia, in a small Celtic village where 80-year-old Marina lived. What should have been a carefree childhood with her family. Her father was a skilled metalworker who crafted beautiful jewelry and ceremonial weapons for the local chieftain, while her mother was known throughout their community as a gifted healer who could cure ailments that baffled other village-wise women. Marina herself was remarkable even by Celtic standards. She possessed an almost supernatural ability to communicate with animals, particularly the wild creatures that lived in the forests surrounding their village. Local legends said that Marina could calm savage wolves with a whisper, convince eagles to perch on her shoulder, and even persuade bears to play with her like gentle dogs. Whether these stories were literal truth or Celtic folklore doesn't matter. What mattered was that Roman scouts had heard these tales and recognized them as exactly the kind of exotic spectacle that would drive their wealthy patrons into bidding frenzies. The raid that destroyed Marina's world came without warning, on a fog-covered morning when most of the village was still asleep. These weren't ordinary slave raiders, but specialized procurement teams working for Rome's entertainment industry, equipped with detailed intelligence about specific individuals whose unique abilities made them worth more than gold. They struck with military precision, eliminating anyone who might resist while capturing their primary target, the little girl whose alleged powers with animals could make someone fantastically wealthy. Marina woke to her mother's screams as armed men smashed through their door. She watched in terror as they killed her father when he tried to protect his family, and saw her mother fall with a spear through her chest as she begged them to spare her daughter. The last thing Marina heard from her dying mother was a desperate plea in their native Celtic tongue, asking the gods to protect her baby girl from whatever horrors awaited her. The journey to Rome was 6 weeks of systematic torture designed to break Marina's spirit while preserving her value as entertainment. She was chained in the hold of a slave ship, with dozens of other captured children given barely enough food and water to survive while being subjected to daily conditioning sessions that began preparing her for her future role as living spectacle. But Marina's real nightmare began when she reached Rome's entertainment slave processing centers, where children were evaluated not for their ability to work, but for their potential to provide increasingly extreme forms of amusement for audiences who had grown bored with conventional gladiatorial combat. The moment the slave dealers saw Marina's reaction to the wild animals kept at the facility, she instinctively approached them without fear and seemed to calm even the most vicious beasts. They knew they had discovered something that could make them incredibly rich. Marina was immediately selected for the Beastmaster training program, an elite conditioning system that transformed children with natural animal abilities into human spectacles who could perform impossible feats with dangerous creatures for the entertainment of Rome's wealthiest citizens. This was education, or skill development. It was systematic, psychological manipulation designed to enhance her natural talents, while stripping away everything that made her human. The training facility where Marina spent the next year was disguised as a luxury School but functioned as a prison where children were isolated, conditioned, and transformed into living entertainment systems. Marina was housed in a cell, decorated to look like a comfortable bedroom. But every aspect of her environment was carefully controlled to maximize her development as a beastmaster, while preventing her from forming emotional bonds that might interfere with her performance. Her daily routine was a carefully orchestrated nightmare of animal training, psychological conditioning, and systematic desensitization to violence that would have destroyed most adults. Marina learned to command lions, tigers, bears, and wolves through techniques that combined natural empathy with deliberate exposure to increasingly dangerous situations that taught her to suppress normal fear responses. The physical conditioning was brutal beyond imagination. Marina's body was constantly monitored and adjusted to optimize her performance with wild animals. Her reflexes sharpened through dangerous exercises. Her pain tolerance increased through deliberate exposure to animal attacks that left her scarred, but more valuable, her fear responses systematically eliminated through traumatic experiences that no child should ever endure. But the psychological conditioning was even more devastating. Marina was taught to view herself not as a person, but as a specialized tool designed to provide entertainment, to suppress every natural emotion, except the artificial calm needed to work with deadly predators, to accept that her value lay entirely in her ability to risk her life for other people's amusement. By the time Marina was ready for sale at age 9, she had been transformed into something that barely resembled the Celtic child who had once played safely in her village. She moved with unnatural calm around creatures that would terrify experienced gladiators, spoke in carefully modulated tones that seemed to hypnotize wild beasts, and radiated the kind of supernatural presence that made her seem like a living goddess of the hunt. The auction that would make Marina worth 10 ships took place in Rome's Forum Boreum, where the empire's wealthiest citizens gathered to bid on entertainment, so exclusive that only a handful of people could afford it. Word had spread through aristocratic circles that something unprecedented was being offered. A child beastmaster whose abilities surpassed anything previously seen in Roman arenas. The bidding war that erupted was beyond anything in Roman auction history. Senator Gaius Flavius opened with 200,000 denarii, already enough to buy a massive estate with hundreds of slaves. But within minutes, the price had doubled, then tripled, as Rome's elite engaged in a competition that was less about acquiring entertainment and more about demonstrating wealth so vast that normal economic considerations became meaningless. The final winning bid came from Empress Faustina, the elder, wife of Emperor Antoninus Pius, who had decided that only imperial resources could afford such an extraordinary acquisition. The price she paid, 1,200,000 denarii, was equivalent to the cost of 10 fully equipped merchant ships, more than the annual budget of most Roman provinces, more than the value of entire armies' equipment and supplies. Marina had become not just the most expensive child in Roman history, but one of the most valuable human beings ever purchased, worth more than some cities' total economic output. But this astronomical price tag came with expectations that no 9-year-old could possibly fulfill. She was expected to provide entertainment so spectacular that it would justify an investment larger than imperial building projects. Life in the imperial household was a golden prison where Marina existed solely to provide increasingly dangerous performances for the empress and her guests. She was housed in luxurious quarters decorated with exotic animals and expensive artwork, fed the finest foods available in the empire, and attended by servants whose only job was maintaining her ability to perform with deadly predators. But beneath this surface luxury lay a reality of constant terror and systematic abuse. Marina was expected to be available for command performances at any time, ready to risk her life with wild animals for the entertainment of imperial dinner guests. She performed in private arenas, where wealthy Romans gathered to watch a child dance with lions, wrestle with bears, and demonstrate supernatural control over creatures that had been trained to kill for sport. The psychological pressure was unbearable for a child who had been torn from her family and forced to risk her life daily for other people's amusement. Marina lived in constant fear that a single mistake, a moment of normal human fear, a failure to control a predator, a sign of the trauma that consumed her, might result in her being killed by the very animals she was forced to work with. The isolation was perhaps the cruelest aspect of her captivity. Marina existed in a world where every person around her saw her only as expensive entertainment, where her suffering was invisible, because acknowledging it would interfere with her function as spectacle. She had no one to comfort her nightmares about her murdered parents, no way to process the daily trauma of risking her life for applause, no hope of ever being treated as a child rather than as a living toy. as months turned to years. Marina began showing signs of the psychological damage that inevitably resulted from her impossible situation. Despite her training in emotional suppression, she started having episodes where her control over the animals would falter. Moments when her natural fear responses would break through the artificial calm that had been drilled into her. These cracks in her performance did not go unnoticed by Empress Faustina, who became increasingly dissatisfied with her expensive investment. The beginning of the end came when Marina reached her 11th birthday and began showing signs of normal child development that threatened her value as a supernatural beastmaster. She was growing taller, her voice was changing, and most importantly, she was beginning to display the normal emotional responses of a traumatized child: crying, fear, and occasional refusal to perform with the deadliest animals. Empress Faustina watched these changes with growing frustration and anger. She had paid the equivalent of 10 ships for a perfect child beastmaster who would remain unchanged forever. And Marina's natural human development felt like a betrayal of her massive investment. The Empress consulted with trainers about ways to halt Marina's maturation and restore her to perfect compliance, subjecting the girl to increasingly harsh conditioning designed to suppress her emerging humanity. But the real crisis came when Empress Faustina realized that her guests were becoming bored with Marina's performances. The novelty of watching a child control wild animals had worn off after 3 years, and the aristocrats who attended imperial entertainments were demanding new, more extreme spectacles to satisfy their jaded appetites for violence and spectacle. The decision to dispose of Marina was made with the same cold calculation that had driven her original purchase. Rather than selling her and allowing her to continue existing in some form, Empress Faustina decided to extract maximum entertainment value from her investment by using Marina's death as the ultimate spectacle, feeding her to lions in the Colosseum during public games that would demonstrate imperial generosity, while providing the most extreme entertainment possible. The final performance was scheduled as the climax of games, celebrating the anniversary of Antoninus Pius's reign, ensuring maximum attendance and symbolic significance for what everyone understood would be Marina's execution, disguised as entertainment. She would face multiple lions in the arena without weapons or protection, with the understanding that her death would provide closure for the investment, while demonstrating that even the most valuable human possessions were ultimately disposable. But Marina's final moments in the arena became something unexpected. Not just an execution, but a heartbreaking display of the connection between a traumatized child and the animals she had been forced to control. When the lions were released, instead of attacking her, they seemed to recognize something in Marina that even years of conditioning could not destroy: her natural empathy and communication with wild creatures. For several minutes, the crowd watched in stunned silence as Marina stood calmly among the lions, who approached her not with aggression, but with something resembling curiosity and even affection. The little girl, who had been trained to suppress every human emotion, reached out to touch the massive predators, and they responded by nuzzling her hands like oversized cats seeking comfort from someone who understood their pain. But this moment of connection between child and beast was not what the crowd had paid to see. The audience began jeering and demanding blood, furious that their entertainment was being denied by what appeared to be Marina's supernatural control over the animals. Empress Faustina, watching from the imperial box, was enraged that her expensive investment was failing to provide the spectacular death that would justify 3 years of ownership. The solution was as cruel as it was predictable. Arena handlers began using spears and fire to drive the lions into a frenzy, deliberately tormenting the animals until their natural aggression overrode any connection they might have felt with Marina. The child, who had spent 3 years learning to communicate with wild creatures, was killed by animals who had been tortured into madness specifically to ensure her death would be sufficiently violent for the audience's entertainment. Marina died at age 11 in the sand of the Colosseum, torn apart by creatures she had once been able to calm with a whisper. The little girl, who had cost more than 10 ships, who had been trained to supernatural perfection, who had survived 3 years of systematic abuse, was destroyed for the amusement of an audience who applauded her death as enthusiastically as they had once applauded her impossible performances. The broader implications of Marina's story reveal the systematic cruelty that characterized Rome's entertainment industry and its treatment of children as consumable luxury products. Her case demonstrated how the empire's enormous wealth and sophisticated culture coexisted with forms of human exploitation, so extreme that they transformed innocent children into commodities more valuable than military equipment. The economic aspects of her story also expose disturbing truths about Roman society's priorities and values. The fact that imperial resources equivalent to naval fleets could be spent on a child's suffering for entertainment purposes demonstrates a level of moral corruption that helps explain the empire's eventual collapse. When societies that had retained basic human values proved more resilient than civilizations built on systematic exploitation. But perhaps most tragically, Marina's story represents thousands of similar cases that have been lost to history. The Roman entertainment industry involved countless children who were captured, trained, and killed according to the whims of audiences who treated human suffering as renewable entertainment. Archaeological evidence and scattered historical references suggest that the systematic destruction of children for spectacle was not exceptional, but routine. Modern historians studying Roman entertainment have used cases like Marina's to understand how economic systems can create incentives for the most extreme forms of human exploitation. The enormous profits available from exotic entertainment encouraged networks of kidnapping, conditioning, and systematic murder that extended throughout the known world, destroying families and communities to supply Rome's appetite for increasingly extreme spectacles. Yet Marina's story also serves as a reminder of individual human dignity and the connection between all living creatures that even systematic conditioning cannot completely destroy. Despite years of training designed to strip away her humanity, she retained enough of her authentic self to communicate with the lions in her final moments, demonstrating that some aspects of human empathy and compassion cannot be eliminated even by the most brutal conditioning. Her legacy challenges modern readers to examine our own society's treatment of children in entertainment industries, where youth and innocence can still be exploited for profit and adult gratification. While we may not have gladiatorial games, we still live in a world where children's talents and vulnerabilities can be systematically exploited by systems that prioritize profit over protection. The Girl Who Was Worth 10 Ships and FedToLions serves as both historical tragedy and moral warning, reminding us that behind every system of entertainment that depends on human suffering, there are individual children whose pain deserves our attention, and whose memory demands our commitment to protecting rather than exploiting the most vulnerable members of society. If this story of childhood destroyed by systematic exploitation and the ultimate price of treating human beings as consumable entertainment has affected you, I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. What aspect of Marina's ordeal disturbs you most? The astronomical price paid for a child's suffering? The 3 years of systematic conditioning that stripped away her humanity? Or the casual decision to feed her 2 lions when she was no longer amusing? And if you're interested in more stories that reveal the hidden human cost behind historical spectacles we often romanticize, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because the past is filled with individual tragedies that deserve our attention as reminders of what happens when societies lose sight of their fundamental obligation to protect children rather than exploit them for entertainment.